Right, my name's Claire Deacon. I am a professional construction health and safety agent. That's not where I started my career, but it's where I am now. The start of my career was in fact in nursing, with a diploma of general nursing from Groote Hospital a long time ago. And once I qualified, discovered that I really wanted to work with people in the sector of industry to keep people well. And so I started studying and working in the industrial sector as an occupational health nurse, which I did for about 18 years, and did a lot of studying in that time. And then decided that a lot of people were going off sick as a result of what they were doing and perhaps why they were doing their work, and causing ill health and early retirement. So I went to go and study ergonomics at UCT. So I got an honours degree in ergonomics, and then I discovered after that in fact that wasn't really the problem. You can't fix things retrospectively. It's a design issue, and the designers are the construction sector. So I ended up going into construction to try and sort the problem out from that point of view, because that was really the issue that I suppose really resonated in terms of, well, that's the time to actually, iron out or to fix it from the start. Therefore, there's nothing to do afterwards, and that would have the knock-on effect of going back and correcting all the things that I dealt with during my career in occupational health, to stop and to reduce the amount of absenteeism, ill health, people going and retiring early with a poor quality of life and so on. So then I did a master's in also nursing, but looking at the health status of construction workers. So that was just really about looking at the type of instrument or the methodology of doing medical surveillance in the construction sector. And now I'm doing a PhD in construction management, looking at health and safety and looking at the effects of design and procurement on construction health and safety. So that kind of will finalize or kind of finish the education loop. But certainly I think from that perspective, it's from where I started to where I am now, and the roles I play now, I think are best suited given what I've done in life, and I think are best to try and show and individuals that you can do things with very little, depending on where it is that you want to go and what it is that you want to achieve. So by wanting to make a difference in the average worker's life, I did that through education and through training of myself, so I could make a difference in other people's lives. So now I work on the council, rather I'm a member of the council, the SACP-CMP, representing health and safety, which is an honour, and it's been an incredibly steep learning curve. But I think again it fits in with what it was that I initially set out to do, and that was to change the way people think, the way they behave, and the way that they do things, because that ultimately will help those that are doing work in any industry, not just the construction sector. Ultimately now we're fixing what's happening in the construction sector, but again it'll have a knock-on effect in any industry. Okay, the original construction regulations were promulgated in 2003. And what that did was to highlight the high areas of risk and loss in the sector, in the construction sector. We had an enormous amount of fatalities and injuries and ill health, many of which in fact are not documented or not noted. Those regulations worked up obviously for 10 years. And in between that period of time, there was quite a lot of consultation from the Department of Labour and various bodies relative to how could we make them better, because as we were going along, the numbers weren't declining that much in terms of fatalities loss and the type of losses that were being experienced. The difference between the 2003 regulations and the 2014 regulations are reasonably significant, in that the requirements and the onus on the client, being the owner, say for example it's Sandton City, the owner of Sandton City is the client, and the designers, the architects and the engineers that actually do the drawings and do all the the work that needs to be done in order to go out to building the Sandton City, there's an enormous amount of onus placed on those two areas and categories rather, to make sure that they take cognizance of health and safety. So whereas before a lot of the onus was and the liability lay with the contractor. In other words, the contractor was responsible for making sure that all health and safety rules applied. They were the ones who had to to do the work and to make sure that the workers didn't die or get ill during their days. But then again, they've identified through research and through the issues of looking at the causes of injury and disease that, in fact, the earlier you introduce or look at what the health and safety issues are, the better you are able to control them. So they moved the focus away from just the contractor and now kind of labelled the client and the designer as equal parties in terms of the responsibility and liability that goes with managing health and safety. So that is a significant issue. The other significant issue that they've brought in is whereas before one used to have to notify the Department of Labour of any construction work, they've now introduced a permit system. Very much like in the building regulations, every contractor or every work site has to have a building permit. This is now a health and safety permit, which has very significant requirements for the contractor, the client and the designers. The other aspect which is very important in terms of that regulation is the fact that the professionalization of the health and safety categories have been introduced. They published a special notice to identify that in the course of that regulation, the only people that may do work in those particular environments, that be for the client and for the contractors, the principal contractors and their contractors, for example, they have to use a registered person. And that would either be the health and safety agent, the professional category, which is now registered with council, or a health and safety manager or officer, which would generally work for the contractor. And those particular individuals now being registered would be vetted in terms of their qualifications, skills and experience in being able to help and do the different types of work at the different stages of construction from the time they start designing all the way through to the time they hand that Sandton City back to the owner of that particular area or product. Okay, I think the issue is that the easier ones to know about in terms of construction injuries are the people that die. We've had a couple of really wonderful experiences in the last while. We've had the Tongaat, mall collapse. We've had Meyersdal. We had, I think, 7 workers were killed in a road accident in Bloemfontein somewhere, which didn't really hit the media. There were 5 or 6 workers who were killed by lightning strike, also in the Bloemfontein area, I think a few months ago. There were, I think, recently a couple of workers who were killed. I think yesterday I saw something again about a few workers that had been killed falling off a building. We had the Kucha Bridge collapse where 2 workers died. And so those are the ones that hit the news. The ones that we don't hear about could also be fatalities. But because there's very little response or follow through from the Department of Labour or from the police, and they don't always talk to each other, they don't really work well together, some of those fatalities or whatever happens fall through the cracks, especially the accidents. So somebody could be, for example, driving to work or driving to a project, have a road accident, be seriously injured, and the claim won't go through the Compensation Commission, it'll go via the Road Accident Fund, or via the person's medical aid, or just land them in hospital and be missed altogether. So there are a lot of that kind of area where injuries, diseases specifically, get lost in the mill of things, because there's no real fixed area. The general hospitals don't want to go through the hassle factor of going through the compensation process, because it is a laborious process. to get, because, and again, from that perspective, the doctors don't get paid. So, they don't want to deal with compensation cases. So they would rather than deal with it via medical aid, or they'll say go to the public hospital and it'll be lost. So in many cases, we don't know what the true figures are. The other critical thing is that we know what's happening in the world, but we don't know what's happening here. The Compensation Commissioner hasn't reported on statistics since 1999. So we know via the Department of Labour that there was approximately 258 fatalities last year, but we've got no further details on that. We don't know, for example, what percentage of people have been made ill suffering from different types of occupational diseases like noise-induced hearing loss, asbestosis, skin ailments, etc. We know about some of them because some of the bodies, like for example the Federated Employees Mutual Association, or FEMA as we call it, do publish stats every month because they are a carrier or one of the recognised insurance bodies that report for the Compensation Commissioner, that covers specifically the construction sector, but they only cover a portion of it. So again, we know we've got snapshots of what's going on in terms of, what the accident rates and so on are for particular types of losses and so on, but not the true picture. We could probably multiply it by 1,000 and we still wouldn't know whether we're even hitting the button of knowing how close we are to the real picture. And the problem with that is that everybody runs around like ostriches with their head in the sand. Nobody really believes there's a problem because no one's actually talking about it. So the health issues are the ones that are really the problems. Not so much the fatalities, because those are going to get reported by the media, and we're very grateful for that, because sometimes from us as professionals, that's the only time we hear that there's a problem. The Department of Mineral Resources has a very good process. They're a very, very good government body, and I think the rest of the sectors could learn a lot from them in terms of applying their systems or similar systems. They report monthly to the DMR. Every mine, for example, has to report monthly to the DMR regarding their statistics, and I think we should do something similar to the Department of Labour. I do think that the Department of Labour is seriously under-resourced, and I think, under-resourced and also underskilled, because they don't have the resources to be able to, put out that kind of information. Otherwise, I think we'd have more of it. I think there's one issue which, if I compare what happens in the culture of health and safety overseas compared to South Africa, we don't have a culture of self-regulation, which is in fact the basis of our legislation. The legislation is not there to be policed. You're supposed to police it yourself. So the example I heard yesterday, which I thought was quite a good one, was about smoking. You won't go into a forum where your neighbour sitting on the chair here would be smoking, because I don't smoke. I take objection to that. So I'm going to say to him, you can't smoke in here. That's self-regulation. I'm taking responsibility for myself and what he is doing to me as a result of his action. We don't have, and you can translate that into health and safety. If somebody is doing something wrong, in other words, they've come to work and they haven't got their safety shoes on, or they haven't put the appropriate equipment on to do a job, no one's saying to that person, but you can't go to work like that, or I'm not going to allow you to start doing that job, because if you work like that, you're going to put me at risk, or I could get injured as a result of what you're doing. We don't have that culture, and it really starts at the bottom. It starts with the worker being responsible for himself and taking responsibility in owning health and safety. And I think that goes all the way up and down. If the client, or if senior management or clients don't own it and state it in that way, it's not going to filter down the process, and similarly upwards. When one is in construction, the construction sector tend to focus just on the construction regulations. They don't focus on any of the other regulations, which in fact could have an impact on the construction process. For example, a piece of equipment like a jackhammer emits something like 107 decibels of noise, which means that when you know what kind of plant is going to be used, you can't just look at the construction regulations in isolation. One has to go and have a look at the noise-induced hearing loss regulations as well, because that has a direct impact on the nature of the work and the potential exposure of those workers using that particular piece of equipment. So it was just to show, or just to make sure that anybody who's practicing construction management, which is what the focus of this particular presentation is to make sure that they don't look at things in isolation. Be aware that there are other things to look at. And while they might not have the requisite knowledge outside of the construction regulations, the health and safety professionals could. So whether it's a health and safety officer or the agent acting in that capacity to support whichever level of work it is, they would know which of the different regulations to apply given these circumstances. The SACP-CMP obviously registers construction managers as a particular discipline and is a professional category. That goes through a process of putting together sets of documentation which compiles almost a portfolio of evidence in terms of their CV, their experience, their skill sets. They have to write articles about the different challenges and positive projects that they've worked on, which relate back to their CV and their project profiles. And then they go through an interview. So they go through, only once they've been through all of those processes, and there might be a couple of others that I've missed out in those steps, but through that process, and it's all peer review, they would come out the other side as a PRCM. The other aspect in terms of health and safety regarding the construction and the other, in fact generally across the built environment, we find that the knowledge and the understanding of health and safety is very limited. We put that down largely because there's no underpinning knowledge or underpinning training within the tertiary education process. So many of the universities don't have health and safety as a subject or as any kind of experiential learning which would incorporate health and safety in their daily jobs. That is what actually causes the problem. So when they come out of university or whichever institution it is that they come out of, they've gone through that process, they've got experience, and if that particular organizations they've worked in their careers haven't had good health and safety practices, they're not going to know how to apply that, and they won't know because they haven't had it as part of their training. So that going forward is a critical issue that we're hoping will be addressed through council and through the program accreditation processes, where there's a direct drive by the council to look at embedded health and safety knowledge, and that's not a short course on that, but linking health and safety issues as they apply to the various processes. So the drive of the council then is to look at through the program accreditation program the different universities which they have vetted the various programs, and to look at how health and safety has been integrated into those courses. So whether you are studying at Mangosuthu Buthelezi University or Walter Sisulu or CPUT or WITS or UP, doesn't matter, you will have eventually some level of health and safety incorporated into that training. Not just short courses, but embedded in terms of, if you're doing structures, what are the health and safety elements that go into structures? If you're going into contract documentation, how does that link into health and safety? So there's an embedded knowledge, so that when everybody comes out of university, they already know how to apply health and safety right from the word go. It's an integrated process. It's not an add-on, which it is now, or not seen as an add-on. I think it's going to take another decade or so. There are some universities that have got very good programs. Nelson Mandela Metropolitan University has got a master's program, and they're just introducing an honours program in construction health and safety. So that would be open to both those who are working in the disciplines of the built environment. So it could be a project manager or construction engineer who wants to go and do a master's degree, but now they've brought it down to an honours degree. There are other training programs. There are specifically health and safety programs looking at construction related issues. But the majority of construction health and safety programs are very basic, they're very generic. So they would cover anybody across the sector, not necessarily only in construction. CPUT also runs a BTEC program. University of Pretoria, I think, has got a program. Da Vinci Institute has got a program. And all of those, as they come through the process, will be accredited through the council and will get the appropriate recognition. That also means that with the continuing professional development, the CPD process, which links to that, we also have to look, obviously, given that the fact that the reality of people not having that training, we're also then looking at CPD points, so that, for example, a CM would score higher points if they were going to study and do short courses in health and safety, which would then give them the underpinning knowledge, or at least some knowledge. It's not rocket science. It can be very technical because there's a lot to know, but if you apply your mind and you think about things and you look at them holistically, I think anybody can do health and safety, especially at that level. They're not having to do the work, but it's a matter of managing and coordinating, which is what the CM's role is, in fact, on a project. I think that there's a definite misconception about how much health and safety costs. But there's also a misconception in terms of how it should be applied. Like I said before, the issue of people having that feeling of it's an add-on. And it will cost more money when it's an add-on. You can't expect it to be, if you're building it into the process and you are taking the costs right back to from the beginning of design. So you have an idea of the Sandton City, you want it to be a multi-story building with the latest technology and so on. You start looking at the health and safety costs right then, because there will be implications relative to the type of design that the architects would like. I mean, if the client wants to have a shard or a berge or something like that, which is going to be aesthetically challenging and obviously very complex in terms of design and very difficult in terms of constructability, then clearly the health and safety costs are going to be very high, because you need to look at all of those processes relative to the risks to those workers and obviously maintenance costs through the life cycle. But that said, if good consideration is given through the design stages and so on relative to those costs and to health and safety, I think they can be contained, and I think they can be well identified so that everybody knows exactly what the costs are going to be. But it takes a team effort. It's not any one person's baby, and certainly I think that at this point in time the health and safety stuff is left to the health and safety practitioners and not taken on as any part of the responsibility within the clients or designers, and that includes CMs. And it goes back to your original question around why the construction regulations were promulgated and what the differences were, was specifically relative to that, is that it's not the contractor's problem to manage health and safety when those risks have been created by the client or the designer. There will be risks which they are inherent in the project because of the complexity of the design, and clearly in that should have been noted, and that should have been that would have been catered for relative to the project. I think again it goes back to how do you identify what the risks are, and the construction regulations requires the client already to be looking at risks right from design stage, right from stage one, as we call it in the council's stages of work. So, excuse me, it's the responsibility of the client to make sure that those risks are identified, because you can't manage what you can't identify. So, and clearly, you might decide, okay, well, I want such and such a building. The designer comes with these designs, and you say, well, I now want this kind of building, or I like that design, or I saw this and I'd like that to be included in my design. That changes things. That might increase or decrease the risk. If the client decides he wants a particular type of design, and there are changes as there are during design stage, the requirement of the health and safety agent and the team is to look at those particular types of risks and whether in fact they are appropriate and how they can be managed. If the client is really dead set on a particular design, then there are going to be inherent risks which are relative to that particular process. And then the challenge to the rest of the team is, how do we manage this risk going forward? Because ultimately, during the construction stage, which is stage 5, one must make sure that the workers are not overly exposed, because there's an element of risk. So with that comes cost. So the better you are able to design out those risks during the early stages of the project design, the more likely you are to have a cost-effective design with limited risk, with limited loss of life and illness and disease. So we look at things like, for example, the products, the processes, the equipment that's used, the products that have been specified by the designers, the different types of paint finishes, the floor finishes, the types of lighting, because they all impact again on how those workers are constructing that particular space, and also going forward once that client takes back that space, how his workers are going to be affected doing the work in that environment. Is the lighting appropriate? Is the flooring appropriate? Are the desk spaces and so on appropriate? So you can't do that unless you've assessed all of those risks, through that process from one stage to the other. The risk assessment process is never ending. It's an ongoing process which is not a finite process. It's infinite. Okay, one of the real problems and one of the major reasons for fatalities are collapses. So one of the more prescriptive areas in the construction regulations looks at temporary works. Temporary works is anything which is of a temporary nature that is required to construct a section of the structure. In other words, it will be access scaffolding to get to a particular part of the building if they're going to be painting, or it could be support work which is now going to prop and support a slab that they're going to pour, and so on. So temporary works is anything which is going to do something like that. The person who is doing that has to be specifically qualified. They have to be a structural expert, essentially, and that's what that whole temporary work scenario covers. The reason why I've brought it in is because it's not well managed on site. Most of the issues are that temporary works are thrown. We do it every day. Don't worry about it. We don't have to kind of take any nonsense or any notice of it. So there's very little attention paid to the building and the design of something like an access scaffold, where you've got particular types of materials going to be loaded on it. You've got people that are working on it. You've got dagger or cement and bricks loaded on it with other equipment and materials needed to use to put into place. So where something like that is not taken into account and not designed properly and not understanding what those issues are, and the contractor goes ahead and he builds that particular structure, temporary structure, that's when they collapse. So, or they are removed before they should have been, because if you're doing something like support work, there are very specific requirements around how long that support work must be in place. It has the concrete has to have reached a certain amount of strength before it can be removed, and there's a very specific process which is built into the engineer's criteria around who can do that, when those aspects must be done, and so on. So that what they've done now is they've taken those standards and they've just built it into the construction regulations as being a separate area which now is incorporated in terms of a health and safety risk because of the high number of fatalities that are related to temporary works. So the intention is to try and ensure that the management of health and safety around temporary works is now inculcated in the Health and Safety Act, which makes it sometimes a little challenging because when, for me as an agent, going and auditing a contractor and you're looking at the temporary works designs and so on, I'm looking for specific things to be in place. And if they're not there, it becomes a problem, you know, and one is then obliged to stop the work and say, well, you've got to pull this down or you've got to get somebody in to, you know, come and sort it out. Whereas in fact it would have been easier to do it right in the first instance, and there would be no delays going forward. Facilities and welfare, I suppose many people refer to it as, really goes around respect for people. The green rockets, as they're often called in terms of the toilets, the temporary toilets on sites, are not the place that you would send your mother into. And they really are generally not well looked after. They're there because they are expected to be there, but they're not well managed in terms of kept clean and appropriate for the type of site. The picture I had was a table and lots of dirt around it, and then the noise levels next to it. And that particular slide referred to a project that we were doing, and the rest area was under a nice big fig tree, where the contractor provided his workers with a table, and there was a toilet next door. But in probably about 15 to 20 meters away, there were 5 crushers running. And that was the average noise that I picked up on my phone, on my iPhone app, of 92 decibels, which meant that those workers, if they were taking a rest, were not actually resting because they are now being continually bombarded by noise, which is way above the noise levels that are regulated of 85 decibels. So that increases people's blood pressure, it increases their stress levels. We know that has knock-on effects. But it goes about, as I said, respect for people. If you respect the people that are doing the work for you, and that is all about people management, then you give them appropriate, resources to rest, because that's what it's there for. Clean toilets, clean potable drinking water, shelter, because a lot of our workers are working in very, very difficult conditions. They work out in construction happens outside. And often in very remote areas. So if you work in a very remote area, it could be, like this morning, close to 0 degrees, but they have to work because the clock is ticking, and every second is money. So if as one generally finds, the toilets are placed 15 meters or maybe a kilometer down the road, those workers are not going to go and use that toilet. They're going to use the bush, which it becomes an environmental issue. And why should anybody expect them to? Why could the contractor not have just thought ahead for what he needs to do tomorrow to make sure there's a toilet that is clean and available for his workers? So it is really about, what would you expect for yourself? It goes back to that self-regulation that I spoke about, where workers don't complain about it because they would be, feel that they would be jeopardized in terms of their jobs. It really does go down to that. So, the workers don't complain. The supervisor don't want to complain because it'll show them up, and the contractor won't complain because he doesn't want to incur any more costs. So if he's got 15 teams working on a project or on different floors, he should have the appropriate number of toilets, for example, that is going to best benefit him from a productivity point of view, and that it's also not seen in that light. If people have to go, that's another 20 minutes off off their work day to actually get to go and relieve themselves. That's not fair. It's really not good. So that's the reason why I bring that in. That is a CM's responsibility, or part of the construction manager's responsibility, to make sure that his workers are well looked after in order for them to be more productive at work. I think, the built environment, no professional works in isolation, and nor should they. You know, the architects can't do without the quantity surveyors can't do without the engineers can't do without the, their particular disciplines. They can't do without the land surveyors or the environmentalists or the health and safety practitioners, registered persons. And everyone still is working in such silos that it makes it so difficult really to get people to understand or be on the same page. And I think that really is a critical issue, is that I think, and that's why from our council's perspective, we're excited from the health and safety professionals' point of view. We were so excited because this is the only council and the only health and safety category which in fact is professional in South Africa. And the health and safety professionals go through exactly the same process as all the other two categories of registration in the council. So we do the same, CVs, papers, interviews. The health and safety officers and managers write exams. So they go through everything up until the point of examination, and they write exams. So the difference is in that area, and they're not professional categories, but they are still registered persons, and they're recognized by the Department of Labour in terms of the construction regulations. So the idea with doing that is to make sure again that the built environment, when we go onto a project, we are giving them the support that we know that they need. They might know that, people don't know that they need things. We will go in and show them what we can do in terms of, if you want to build this kind of structure, it might be a 50-story building, it looks beautiful. Okay, let's get down to nitty-gritty and say, let's have a look at the designs and say, okay, what materials are you using? How long is this process going to be? And work through things methodically with them, and not to change their designs, or not to change their thinking, other than to include health and safety in that process, so that when that job is ready to be built, that structure is ready to be built, they know with some level of surety that they have looked at all of the health and safety issues and the potential risks which could exist going forward. You can't control what the contractor is going to do, because he's going to come with his own set of requirements and way to build. But at least one can, really have a very good understanding of what is going to go forward. And then going onto the project, also to work with that team and to monitor the contractor through that process, makes it again so much easier when you know what went before and why things were particularly designed to be like that, or what thought went into it being done this particular way. So it does make an enormous difference when one is as part of that team. It's very difficult where we have the issue now, where the health and safety agent specifically is only brought in once the contractor is already on site. You've got no control over anything. You can't backtrack now, because that becomes a contractual issue and so on. You can really only enforce the legislation, but not really have applied your mind and put better practice approaches into the process, which is really what it's all about. So I've just come back from 2 weeks overseas, and the culture in terms of health and safety was phenomenal, absolutely amazing. The self-regulation issue really does work, and I was fortunate enough to sit in a couple of meetings with training and feedback sessions to a corporate environment. What a difference, in terms of, it wasn't about, why should I do this, or what's it going to cost, or whatever it would. The issue was, okay, let's get that sorted. How are we going to deal with this? How are we going to manage this? What should we, tell us what we need to do. Okay, we can do so and so and so and so, we'll get so and so involved, we'll go and meet with that person, we'll see what we can do to integrate this process. No argument, not even challenging the findings or the thinking behind what was being said. Just get on with it, and we don't have that culture here. It was very refreshing and a pleasure. So absolutely, yeah. And the considerate construction that they run, and I actually saw one of Mace's projects. I didn't visit it, but I walked past it, took some photographs. And again, they have this considerate construction process apparently, where it's an external body that goes in and measures how how well they're managing the people that are affected by their construction process, which is something we don't really look at. We will look at things like, for example, communities and so on. But, you know, we won't worry about how much dust perhaps is being, you know, produced and how it's affecting neighboring buildings or businesses. So they get scored on things like that. So I think we've got some really good lessons to learn, and I think it would be fabulous to be able to have something similar here, which goes back not just for, you know, the respect for people, but also for the respect for communities.